Imagine an idyllic scene. Summer, 1938. Grainy 8mm color film, just like the kind that might be gathering dust in your grandfather's attic. On the screen, a sun-drenched terrace in the Bavarian Alps. A little girl in a snow-white dress laughs as she runs away from her father. The man scoops her up, kisses her forehead, and spins her in the air. They look happy. It looks like a commercial for The Perfect Life, or footage from the Kennedy family archives. But there is one detail missing. This man is not just a loving father. An hour before this footage was taken, he may have signed an order sealing the tragic fate of thousands. And this girl, laughing so sincerely, is sitting on the lap of Heinrich Himmler, or Hermann Göring, or Adolf Hitler himself, whom she affectionately calls Uncle Adi. For those of us growing up in the West, these names are synonymous with absolute evil. We are used to seeing them in black and white newsreels, shouting from podiums, or as caricatured villains in movies. It is difficult for us to imagine that after work, after planning the unthinkable, they returned home, took off their uniforms, and read bedtime stories to their children. But for these children, they weren't monsters. They were just dad. These children grew up in a gilded cage. While Europe burned, they ate chocolate, played with expensive dolls, and believed their parents were saving the world. They were the princes and princesses of the Third Reich. They were told they were the elite, the future of humanity. And then the clock struck midnight. May 1945. Their world didn't just collapse, it turned to dust. Overnight, they went from being the most privileged children on the continent to outcasts. Their fathers took their own lives or ended up on trial in Nuremberg. Their mothers were arrested, their homes confiscated. Imagine what a teenager feels when they learn that their adored father is considered one of the greatest villains in human history. How do you live with a last name that makes people cross the street to avoid you? Today, we will trace the fates of these children. This is not a story about the war. This is a story about what happens after. When the smoke cleared, the children of Nazi leaders had to make a choice. Some tried to disappear. They changed their names, moved to South America, or vanished into the American suburbs, working as simple mechanics or accountants. Others chose the path of repentance. They dedicated their lives to proving to the world and to themselves that evil is not genetic. But there was a third group, those who refused to believe, those who, until their last breath, remained loyal to their fathers, viewing them not as criminals, but as victims. We will look into their diaries. We will hear their confessions. And we will try to answer the question, are we responsible for the sins of our fathers? And we must begin this story with a woman who knew the answer to this question from the very start. To the world, she was the daughter of a monster. But to herself, she remained Daddy's little girl forever. Her name was Gudrun, and while others tried to forget their past, she decided to revive it. In the dark hierarchy of Nazi Germany, Gudrun Himmler held a place comparable to a first daughter. She was the princess of the SS. Heinrich Himmler, a key architect of the regime's atrocities, doted on her. He called her Puppy, Dolly, and this love was mutual, to the point of fanaticism. Chilling entries remain in her teenage diary. In one, she describes a trip with her father. They visited the Dachau camp. Gudrun saw the prisoners, saw the barracks. And do you know what she wrote that evening? We saw the herb garden. It was very nice. To her, the facility was just her father's workplace, another boring field trip. When the war ended, Gudrun was 15. Most children of the regime, upon learning the truth, broke under the weight of guilt. But Gudrun was made of different stuff. When she was informed that her father had taken his own life in British captivity, she coldly replied, "A lie. He was murdered." She refused to change her last name. In post-war Germany, where the name Himmler was a curse, she wore it like a badge of honor. But the most disturbing part began later. You probably think that after Nuremberg, the network was destroyed, that they all scattered. Gudrun Himmler proved otherwise. In 1951, she joined an organization called Stille Hilfe, Silent Aid. On paper, it was a charity. In reality, it was a covert support network for former regime officials running from the law. Gudrun became the star of this structure. She was known as the Nazi princess. She raised money. She hired the best lawyers. She found retirement homes for former camp guards. One of those she helped was Anton Maloth, a man known for his extreme brutality as a guard. Gudrun didn't just help him avoid justice. For years, she paid for his stay in an expensive nursing home near Munich. She visited him with flowers and chocolate, like a granddaughter visiting a beloved grandfather. Until the very end of her life, Gudrun remained an icon for the far right. At gatherings of veterans, which, to the horror of many, took place in Austria and Germany well into the 2000s, she was a guest of honor. When she entered the room, elderly men, responsible for terrible crimes, would stand at attention. She passed away quite recently, in May 2018. She was 88 years old. Until her last breath, she never expressed regret. Not a word about the victims. Only endless loyalty to her father. In her house in Munich, in the basement, she kept Himmler's personal archive, guarding it like a shrine. Gudrun Himmler made her choice. She decided that blood was more important than conscience. She spent her life saving monsters from justice. But there was another daughter of another leader. She too loved her father. But while Gudrun fought for ideology, this woman fought for something more tangible, for gold, paintings, and diamonds stolen from the lost. If Gudrun Himmler was the dark priestess of the ideology, then Etta Goering was its Hollywood star. Imagine the birth of a celebrity child, multiplied by the state propaganda of a totalitarian regime. When Etta was born in 1938, it was a national event. Planes flew over Berlin, spelling her name in the sky with smoke. Her photos were printed on postcards, sold in the millions, and her godfather was Adolf Hitler himself. Her father, Hermann Göring, was the second most powerful man in the Reich. He was known for his love of luxury and art, and Etta didn't just grow up in wealth. She grew up in a museum of stolen treasures. Her home was Karenhall. It wasn't just a mansion. It was a palace in the forest, packed to the ceiling with antiques. While children in Europe went hungry, Etta had her own miniature palace in the garden, where she played with her dolls. But Etta's toys were special. For her birthdays, she didn't receive teddy bears, but Renaissance masterpieces. Paintings by Lucas Cranach, ancient tapestries, diamond necklaces. Where did these gifts come from? It was simple. When the regime confiscated property from families or looted museums in occupied France, the best pieces went to Hermann. Etta Goering literally played ball among paintings stained by the tragedy of their former owners. In 1946, the fairy tale ended. Hermann Göring took his own life hours before his scheduled execution in Nuremberg. Etta and her mother were left with nothing. It would seem like a logical reaction to lay low. Change your name. Live quietly, working in an office, and hope no one finds out who your father was. And at first, Etta did just that. She worked as a clerk in a hospital, living in a tiny apartment in Munich. But resentment lived inside her. Not guilt for the war, but the resentment of a wealthy heiress who had been stripped of her trust fund. In the 1960s, Etta Goering began doing something that would seem insane to any normal person. She started suing the Bavarian government. The dispute? She demanded the return of Daddy's gifts. It sounds like a dark comedy plot, but these are real court records. Etta seriously tried to sue for the return of the painting Madonna and Child by Lucas Cranach the Elder. Her argument was simple and cynical. This was my christening gift. It is my private property. The fact that the painting had been unlawfully seized from a museum in Cologne under pressure from her father was ignored by her. In court, She behaved not like the daughter of a war criminal, but like a victim of robbery. And the most shocking part, she partially won. The German legal system of the 50s and 60s was full of bureaucratic loopholes, and she even managed to recover some of the jewelry. Etta lived until 2018. She lived in the same apartment in Munich. Neighbors described her as an elegant elderly lady who loved to talk about what a wonderful and kind man her father was. In an interview with Swedish television, she recalled with a warm smile, "I loved him. It was obvious that he loved me. My only memories of him are of love. I see no reason to look at him any other way." For Etta, the war was something distant and abstract. The real tragedy of her life was that they took away her favorite painting. Etta fought for a material legacy, but there was a son who decided to fight for history itself. He was convinced that the official version of his father's death was a lie, and he dedicated his entire life to one wild conspiracy theory. In West Berlin, there stood a fortress, Spandau Prison, a massive red brick complex designed for 600 prisoners. It was guarded by soldiers from the four victorious powers: the USA, the USSR, Britain, and France. They rotated every month. Around it were watchtowers, barbed wire, and searchlights, and all of this was guarding a single old man. Prisoner number 7, Rudolf Hess, the deputy Führer. His son, Wolf Rudiger Hess, grew up in the shadow of this prison. But if you think he was ashamed of his father, you are mistaken. Wolf turned his life into a spy thriller, worthy of a Tom Clancy novel. The story of Rudolf Hess is insane in itself. In 1941, he stole a fighter jet and flew alone to Scotland, allegedly to make peace with Britain. He was arrested, declared insane, and after the war, imprisoned for life. For little Wolf, who was only 3 years old when his dad flew into the sky and never returned, his father became a mythical figure. He didn't remember him as a person. He invented him. For his entire adult life, Wolf worked as an architect, but that was just a cover. His real job was a war against history. He created the Committee for the Freedom of Rudolf Hess. He collected signatures, pressured politicians, and wrote books. His narrative was simple and brazen. My father is not a criminal. He is a martyr for peace. He flew to Britain to stop the war, and the Allies locked the dove of peace in a cage. But the longer Hess sat in prison, the crazier Wolf's theories became. He started noticing oddities. His father refused to see the family for 28 years. On rare visits, he acted strangely, not remembering details from their home life. And then Wolf voiced a thought that gave many goosebumps. He claimed, "The man sitting in Spandau prison is not my father." According to Wolf, the real Rudolf Hess was killed or hidden by British intelligence back in 1941, and the man who had been shuffling around the prison yard in Berlin for decades was a double, an actor hired by intelligence agencies to hide the inconvenient truth. Wolf demanded medical examinations, demanded to check for scars his father had from World War I. The authorities refused. This only added fuel to the fire of his paranoia. The climax came on August 17th, 1987. Prisoner number 7 was 93 years old. He was found lifeless in a garden gazebo on the prison grounds. The official verdict was suicide. For Wolf, this was the final proof. He shouted at press conferences, "How could a 93-year-old man with arthritis, who couldn't raise his hands above his shoulders, do this to himself?" Wolf hired independent pathologists. He ordered a second autopsy. Until the end of his days, he claimed that his father, or whoever it was eliminated by agents because he was about to be released and could reveal secrets about the war. Wolf Hess died in 2001. He never admitted that his father was a fanatic. He died with the certainty that he was the son of a holy martyr who fell victim to a global conspiracy. Wolf built conspiracy theories to justify his father. But our next subject took a different path. He also became an architect, just like his father, and he tried to build a career on the ruins of a last name known to the entire world. If you walk through the financial district of Frankfurt today, you will see skyscrapers of glass and steel piercing the sky. This is the heart of modern, democratic Germany. But if you look at the plaque of the architectural firm that designed some of these buildings, you might be shocked. It reads, Albert Speer and Partner. This name makes historians shudder. Albert Speer Sr. was not just the Minister of Armaments. He was Hitler's best friend. He was the man who planned to turn Berlin into Germania, a world capital built on the suffering of forced labor. His son, Albert Speer Jr., did perhaps the strangest thing of all the Nazi children. He didn't change his last name, and he chose the exact same profession. He became an architect. Psychologists might call this an attempt to rewrite fate. All his life, Speer Jr. tried to prove that one could carry this surname and build buildings without being a monster. His childhood was spent in the mountains. Newsreel footage remains. Little Albert playing on the terrace. For the boy, the dictator was just a kind uncle who gave him candy. But when the war ended and his father was sentenced to 20 years in Spandau prison, little Albert's body reacted to the stress in a terrible way. He began to stutter. He stuttered so badly that he almost stopped speaking. It was a physical manifestation of the unspeakable weight that had fallen on his shoulders. He climbed out of this pit through blueprints. He became a brilliant urban planner. He designed the headquarters of the European Central Bank, stadiums for the World Cup, and Olympic venues. He became a respected man, part of the global elite. But the irony of fate pursued him. Critics whispered, the son of the dictatorship's chief architect is now building for regimes in the Middle East and Asia. The shadow of his father was too long. Speer Jr. chose the tactic of silence. Unlike Gudrun Himmler, he did not defend his father. Unlike Nicholas Frank, he did not curse him publicly. He simply tried to separate the man from the function. I am me, he said in rare interviews. I am not responsible for what my father did. But there was one thing that haunted him. His father, Speer Sr., wrote memoirs after prison. He created the image of the good Nazi who allegedly knew nothing about the true extent of the atrocities. And the son believed it. He needed to believe it to survive. The truth only came out in the 2000s. Historians proved that Speer Sr. knew everything. He was personally present at meetings where the final solution was discussed. He lied to the whole world, and he lied to his son. For Albert Jr., this was a blow. The entire structure of his psychological defense, which he had been building for decades, collapsed. He realized that his success, his career, his talent, all of it grew on a foundation of lies. He died in 2017. Until the very end, he tried to outrun his father's ghost by filling the horizon with new buildings. But history shows that you cannot wall yourself off from the past, even with the thickest concrete. Speer tried to lose himself in work. But there was another heir, the son of a man even more feared than Hitler's architect. And this son decided that the only way to wash his hands clean was to pick up a Bible. If you are looking for the darkest irony in the history of the Third Reich, you have found it. Martin Bormann Sr. was not just Hitler's personal secretary. He was the gatekeeper, the man who controlled access to the leader. And, importantly for this story, he was a fierce, fanatical atheist. Bormann Sr. dreamed of destroying the church and replacing it with loyalty to the state. In his ideal world, there was no place for crosses or priests. The irony of fate is that his eldest son, Adolf Martin Bormann, named after Hitler, became a Catholic priest. In childhood, Martin Jr. was the model child of the regime. His godfather, of course, was Hitler. He wore a small uniform and memorized party slogans. But in 1945, when the world collapsed, Martin was 15 years old. He saw the photos from the camps. And unlike Gudrun Himmler, His psyche didn't build walls of denial. It collapsed. He went through a deep existential crisis. He renounced the name Adolf. He converted to Catholicism. And he decided that the only currency that could pay his father's debt was mercy. He didn't just become a priest in a cozy German parish. He asked for the hardest assignment. He went as a missionary to the Congo. Imagine the jungles of Africa in the 60s. Heat, disease, civil unrest. And amidst all this, a tall German in a white cassock, the son of a Nazi criminal, treating, feeding, and teaching local children. Once he was captured by rebels. He was put against a wall, ready to be executed. And, according to legend, he prayed not for his own life, but for the forgiveness of his father's sins. He was released. It seemed fate itself was saving him for a purpose. For decades, the story of Martin Bormann Jr. was the perfect fairy tale of repentance. Journalists loved him. He visited schools, talking about the horrors of the past. He met with survivors in Israel. Imagine the scene. The son of a man who signed deportation orders stands at the altar, breaking bread, and speaking of love for one's neighbor. It seemed evil had been defeated. But this story does not have a happy ending. In 2011, when Bormann Jr. was already an old man suffering from dementia, a scandal broke. And it didn't come from the direction anyone expected. He wasn't accused of believing in the old regime. He was accused of abuse. A former student of a Catholic boarding school in Austria came forward. He claimed that in the early 60s, when he was 12 years old, Father Martin Bormann subjected him to severe misconduct. And this was not an isolated incident. Soon, testimonies appeared about harsh physical punishments practiced by the kind missionary. A commission investigating cases within the church found the allegations credible and paid compensation to the victim. This news was a shock. The man who had spent his life running from the shadow of his monstrous father had, in the end, caused harm to the children entrusted to him. Psychologists speak of cycles of trauma. Martin Bormann Jr. tried to atone for the sins of genocide, but perhaps the brutality of his own upbringing found another outlet. He didn't destroy millions, but he damaged the lives of specific children who looked up to him as a mentor. He died in 2013. We will never know what went on in his fading mind. Did he realize that he had lost the battle with his own bloodline? Bormann ran to God, but his demons caught up with him. Our next subject chose a different escape route. He went to the real jungle, in Brazil, but not to save souls, but to meet the devil in the flesh. If Hitler's name is a synonym for evil, then Josef Mengele's name is a synonym for a nightmare. The angel of death of Auschwitz. A doctor who conducted inhumane experiments on twins and whistled opera tunes while deciding the fate of thousands at the camp selection ramp. To the world, he was a sadist. To Rolf Mengele, he was just Uncle Fritz, who sometimes sent postcards from South America. Rolf was born in 1944. He grew up in West Germany, believing his father had gone missing on the Eastern Front. The truth was revealed to him at 16. And this truth shattered his world. Imagine you are a normal teenager, listening to the Beatles, and suddenly you learn that your father is the most wanted criminal on the planet. Rolf's entire life turned into a spy game. He was watched. His phone was tapped. Agents and hunters tracked his every move, hoping the son would lead them to the father. They were right. In 1977, Rolf did something that makes one's blood run cold. He decided to fly to Brazil. He used a fake passport. He changed routes. He knew that if he slipped up, he would lead the police straight to his father's hideout. But he had to ask one question. He had to hear the answer personally. The meeting took place in a secluded house near São Paulo. Rolf expected to see a powerful villain. Instead, before him stood a pathetic, frightened old man who jumped at every sound. They spent 2 weeks together. It was perhaps the most surreal father-son dialogue in history. Rolf, a successful lawyer, a liberal raised in a democratic Germany, tried to hold a monster accountable. He asked directly, "Did you do it? Did you perform the experiments?" And Joseph Mengele, looking his son in the eye, replied without blinking, "I am not guilty of anything. I saved lives. I was just a cog in the machine. Not a drop of remorse. Not a shadow of doubt." The old man sincerely believed he was a victim of circumstances. For Rolf, this was the moment of truth. He realized his father was not just a criminal. He was a man void of empathy. Rolf returned to Germany, and here begins the most difficult moral test of this story. He knew where the angel of death was hiding. One call to the police or an anonymous letter, and justice would have been served. Millions of victims would have had closure. But Rolf stayed silent. Later, he explained it like this: "I couldn't betray my father. Whatever he was my flesh and blood." Biology won over morality. Rolf chose the role of the keeper of the secret. He remained silent, even when Joseph Mengele drowned while swimming in the ocean in 1979. The family hid his death for another 6 years, so the authorities wouldn't confiscate assets. Only when the body was exhumed and DNA tests confirmed the identity did Rolf step out of the shadows and tell his story. He changed his last name to Jenkel, his wife's name. He tried to shield his children from their grandfather's curse. But Rolf Mengele's action remains an open wound. He didn't commit his father's crimes, but he allowed him to die in freedom, in a warm bed, rather than in a prison cell. Rolf Mengele chose silence out of pity, but there was one child who refused to pity. For him, family ties meant nothing compared to the truth, and his voice rang out like a gunshot. We have seen children who loved their fathers. We have seen those who forgave them. We have seen those who stayed silent. But Nicholas Frank is a unique case. He is the only one who chose the path of total public hatred. His father, Hans Frank, held the title of Governor General of occupied Poland. He was called the Butcher of Poland. He was the one who uttered the chilling phrase, "If I put up a poster every time we shot 7 Poles, the forests of Poland would not be sufficient to manufacture the paper." Nicholas was a little prince in this kingdom of death. The family lived in Wawel Castle in Krakow, the residence of Polish kings. While outside the castle walls people were starving, little Nicholas drove a toy car through the palace halls. One of his most vivid childhood memories is a trip with his mother to the ghetto. They drove in an open-top Mercedes. He saw people with yellow stars, thin as skeletons. He saw the fear in their eyes. But his mother, whom they called the Queen of Poland, didn't go there out of sympathy. She went shopping. She bought furs and corsets for pennies from doomed people. For little Nicholas, this was a lesson. We are the masters. They are nothing. Most children block out such memories. Nicholas dragged them out and turned them into a weapon. He became a journalist, and he dedicated his entire career to destroying his father's memory. He wrote a book with the telling title, The Father. It is not a biography. It is an indictment. Page by page, he strips Hans Frank down, showing him not as a powerful villain, but as a cowardly, greedy, and petty man who sucked up to Hitler for titles and wealth. Nicholas visits schools in Germany and around the world. He stands before teenagers and says things that shock everyone. Once a journalist asked him a provocative question, "Did you love your father at all? Even a little?" Nicholas smiled a cold smile, pulled an old, worn photograph from his jacket pocket, and replied, "I love him only like this, dead." The photo shows Hans Frank moments after his execution in Nuremberg. Nicholas carries this photo with him every day, not as a souvenir, but as proof. He says that sometimes, when he gets scared that the genes might take over, he looks at this photo to make sure. The monster is gone. Evil was punished. Many in Germany condemn Nicholas. They call him a traitor to the family, a man who makes money on his father's disgrace. His own sisters stopped talking to him. But for him, it's not betrayal. It's an exorcism. He believes the only reason he exists is to be a living memorial to his father's victims. Every word of hatred he speaks is an apology to the millions who didn't survive. Unlike Rolf Mengele, who protected the biological bond, Nicholas Frank declared war on his DNA. He refused to have children, fearing that the cursed blood of the Franks would manifest in the next generation. This is the most radical answer to our main question. Can you wash away the sins of the fathers? Nicholas believes you cannot. You can only spend your life pointing at their graves and repeating, "Never again." Nicholas Frank broke the cycle in the most brutal way. He killed the father inside himself. But looking back at all these stories, from the fanatical Gudrun to the conflicted Martin and the furious Nicholas, we approach the finale. What truly defines us? The blood running in our veins, or the choices we make every day? So, we have walked this path. We have looked into the lives of children who did not choose their fathers, from the pompous palaces of the Third Reich to post-war prisons, from cramped apartments to African jungles. We saw Gudrun Himmler, who served the monster her father was until her last breath. Etta Goering, who fought not for memory, but for stolen paintings. Wolf Hess, tangled in a web of conspiracy theories. Albert Speer Jr., who tried to build his life but constantly hit the wall of his father's shadow. Martin Bormann Jr., who sought redemption in faith but was overtaken by his own demons. Rolf Mengele, who stood face to face with evil but could not turn it in. And Nicholas Frank, who chose hatred as a form of moral cleansing. Their stories are not just historical anecdotes. They pose a deep, sometimes painful question to each of us. Are we responsible for our parents' sins? Is evil passed down from generation to generation? Modern psychology and genetics tell us no. We do not inherit evil. We inherit trauma, predispositions, certain character traits, but the choice always remains ours. Of all the children of the Nazi leadership we discussed today, only two, Albert Speer Jr. and Martin Bormann Jr., had children of their own. Gudrun Himmler, Etta Goering, Wolf Hess, Rolf Mengele, Nicholas Frank. None of them continued their line. This is not just a coincidence. It was a conscious, agonizing choice to stop the curse with themselves, to end the bloodline so as not to pass on a name stained with blood. For us, living in societies built on the ideals of free will and individual responsibility, this topic resonates deeply. We are used to thinking that anyone can rewrite their destiny. But what if you have a brand on your back that nothing can wash away? The stories of these children show that the past is not just history. It lives in us, whispers in our ears, weighs on our shoulders. It defines our choices, even when we try to fight it. These people were children. They were innocent of their father's crimes, but they had to carry this burden for the rest of their days. Their lives became silent testimonies that even when an empire of evil falls, its shadows continue to dance in the souls of those who lived within it. And the most important thing we can take from these stories is this: while some choose to worship the past, others will fight to ensure it never repeats. And that is our choice, our duty as a society, never to forget and never to allow it to happen again.